Everyone talks about the first million. You've probably heard the saying, the first million is the hardest. And that's absolutely true. But here's what almost no one tells you. The second million doesn't just come easier, it comes faster. People imagine that once you hit your first million, the next one will take just as long. Another 20 years of grinding, saving, and watching the market crawl upward. But that's not how it works at all. The truth is far more surprising. I'm Mike from Mike Compound, and today we're going to uncover why the second million arrives faster than you think, and how that acceleration can completely change the way you look at money, time, and wealth itself. Let's start with that first million, because that's the part everyone struggles through. It's slow, it's uncertain, and it's not just slow because the numbers are small. It's slow because you're learning everything from scratch. How much to spend, how much to save, how to avoid lifestyle creep, how to manage debt, and how to invest intelligently. You're figuring it all out while trying to survive daily life. Rent, bills, maybe a family, maybe student loans. At this stage, most people don't have a clear map. Mistakes are inevitable. You invest too little, you panic sell during a market dip, you buy the wrong car, or you chase the wrong dream. Every lesson is learned through trial and error. The first million feels like walking blindfolded through a maze, and every turn costs time and energy. Think about the average person, maybe a single-income household with kids, slowly trying to build something real. For one couple, it took them 27 years to reach that first million. 27 years of working, saving, and trying not to give up. But here's the amazing part. That was just 18 months ago. And since then, they've already reached $1.5 million with a goal of $3 million in the next 7 years. And they're right on track. That's the kind of acceleration we're talking about. Once you start to see results, the momentum builds in ways you couldn't have imagined. It's almost like one day you open your portfolio and it's up hundreds of thousands from where it was just a year ago. To understand why, let's look at the math behind it. Imagine a household earning $75,000 per year, saving 20% of their income, and investing it in the S&P 500, which historically averages about 10% annually. After 5 years, their portfolio might be worth around $100,000. 10 years in, about $250,000. 15 years, over $500,000. And after just over 20 years, they finally reach that magical $1 million mark, starting from absolutely nothing. Early on, the numbers barely move. A 10% return on a 10,000 portfolio is just 1,000. It feels like nothing. At this stage, your savings do all the heavy lifting. Every extra contribution matters. Every decision to stay disciplined counts. You're laying bricks, one small investment at a time, with almost no visible reward. That's why the first million feels like it takes forever. You're not just building wealth, you're building discipline, confidence, and patience. Those invisible muscles are what make the second million possible. Think of it like starting a fire in the wilderness. In the beginning, you're blowing on sparks, feeding it tiny twigs, hoping it doesn't die out. Every gust of wind feels like a setback. It takes constant attention and effort just to keep the flame alive. But once the fire catches, once you've built the base, every new log you add burns hotter and brighter with less work. That's what happens after the first million. The foundation is set. Your habits are strong. The system works. And now, finally, compounding can do what it was always meant to do. In the next part, we'll explore that exact turning point, when your money starts growing faster than your effort, and the second million begins to take shape almost on its own. Once you've crossed that first million, something changes. Not just in your bank account, but in your mindset. For years, it felt like compounding was a myth. You'd hear about it, read about it, but never actually feel it. Then one day, you log in, and it's real. Your portfolio isn't crawling anymore, it's moving. Suddenly, those small percentage gains that used to add a few $100s are now adding tens of thousands, sometimes even 6 figures, in a single year. That's when wealth starts to accelerate, and it feels different. Let's say you have $1 million invested and the market grows by 10%. That's a $100,000. In 1 year, without you lifting a finger, that's the same as earning a 6-figure salary without showing up to work. And that's just the baseline. Add your regular contributions, reinvest your dividends, and watch as that fire you started years ago begins to roar on its own. The first million was all about effort. The The second million is about momentum. Consider another real-world example. One family took 17.5 years to reach their first million. 6 years later, they hit 2 million. 4 years after that, they were at 3. Their household income never exceeded $150,000. No lottery tickets, no windfalls, just consistent saving, investing in boring index funds, and letting time do the rest. In just 10 years after reaching their first million, their wealth tripled. Think about that. The same family that spent nearly 2 decades to make the first million added 2 more in half that time. That's the power of compounding when it finally has a foundation to stand on. The reason is simple math. The first million relies mostly on your contributions, your sweat, your savings, your sacrifices. The second million, though, that's your money doing the work for you. Let's break it down. With $1 million invested, earning 10% annually, plus continued contributions, the next million could arrive in just 7 or 8 years. Even if your income isn't $75,000, even if you save less than 15%, the principle remains the same. The second million will always come faster than the first because growth accelerates as the base grows. But the story isn't only about math, it's psychological too. When you finally see the compounding effect in action, something inside you clicks. You stop panicking when the market dips because you've seen it recover before. You stop chasing risky investments because you no longer need a miracle. You realize that time and consistency are your greatest allies. That mental shift is what separates the wealthy from the anxious. Once you've reached that first big milestone, you gain something money can't buy: calm. You're no longer desperate to double your money overnight. You understand that you already own a machine that prints wealth, and all you have to do is keep it running. You also gain leverage. With more wealth, you can negotiate from a place of strength. You can walk away from a bad job offer, a bad deal, or a bad investment. You can take calculated risks, like starting a business, buying property, or investing in something new, because you have a safety net beneath you. And that's what keeps the momentum alive. Confidence fuels consistency, and consistency fuels growth. Here's the most fascinating part. The second million doesn't just come faster mathematically. It comes faster emotionally, because now you're not fighting against doubt. You trust the process. You've seen it work. And that trust allows you to stay the course when everyone else is panicking. One couple shared their journey. When they got married, their combined net worth was around 600 yuan. 6 years later, they reached 2 million. Then, during a bull market, they crossed 3 million in just 2 more years. Was it luck? Partly. The market helped, but as the saying goes, the harder you work, the luckier you get. Because compounding doesn't just depend on timing, it rewards persistence. And here's the real magic. Once you hit that second million, the acceleration doesn't stop. It keeps getting faster, almost unrealistically so. In the next part, we'll see what happens after the second million, when your money begins to grow at a pace that feels almost unstoppable. So what happens after that second million? This is where things start to feel almost unreal, like watching a snowball turn into an avalanche. The acceleration you've built doesn't stop. It compounds on itself. With a $2 million portfolio, a 10% annual return translates to $200,000 in growth per year before you even add a single new dollar. That's double what you earned from your first million. And because the base keeps expanding, the timeline between milestones begins to collapse. If it took 7 years to go from 1 to 2 million, the journey from 2 to 3 could take just 3 or 4. By the time your portfolio reaches $3 million, that same 10% return means $300,000 in annual growth. The kind of money that once felt impossible now appears automatically, quietly compounding behind the scenes. This is the power of scale. Once your capital is large enough, compounding stops feeling like theory and starts behaving like a living engine. The key challenge shifts from how to grow your money to how to stay disciplined while it grows itself. One couple described it perfectly. We never made more than $150,000 a year, but once we hit $1 million, everything changed. 10 years later, their wealth tripled. They didn't change their jobs, didn't chase trends, didn't buy into hype. They just saved, invested, and let time amplify what they'd already built. Of course, markets don't move in straight lines. Bull runs accelerate the climb, while downturns slow it. But if you stay consistent, the average growth still follows the same curve, upward. In fact, people who stay invested through bear markets often come out stronger because they keep buying at lower prices. One person shared that their portfolio reached $2 million about 5 years after their first million, even though they stopped contributing 10 months earlier because they'd retired. That's the beauty of compounding. When the system is strong enough, it keeps working even after you stop. The irony is, most people never reach this stage. Not because they can't, but because they quit too soon. They reach $600,000, $700,000, or even $900,000, and then they start to spend more. They upgrade their homes, their cars, their lifestyles, just as they were about to see exponential growth. They miss the moment when their money starts working faster than they do. If you can stay patient just a little longer, that inflection point, where effort turns into momentum, can completely reshape your life. Let's look at inflation for a second, because some people love to argue that it ruins the math. But here's the truth. The inflationary impact over 3 or 4 years, the time it takes for a $2 million portfolio to grow into $3 million, is minimal compared to the growth itself. Compounding far outpaces it when you're working with millions. And here's something few people realize. Even after retirement, your net worth can still rise. That's because when your assets are producing returns that exceed your withdrawals, your money continues to grow even when you're not actively earning anymore. So while the first million was slow and filled with trial and error, the second one, and everything beyond it, becomes a matter of staying the course. At this level, your biggest enemy isn't a market crash or bad luck. It's impatience, the temptation to tinker, to overthink, to chase faster gains. But the wealthy know that the real secret isn't speed, it's stability. Because when you're sitting on millions, the small percentage gains that once felt meaningless now represent enormous sums. And the difference between reacting and remaining calm can mean hundreds of thousands of dollars. In the final part, we'll look beyond the second million, into what happens when wealth truly compounds without interruption, and how your mindset must evolve to sustain it. At this point, the growth feels almost surreal. You're no longer watching your portfolio inch upward. It's accelerating like a runaway train. The same 10% return that once gave you a few $1,000s now gives you hundreds of thousands. It's not luck, it's the math of momentum. Once compounding has a strong base, it becomes nearly unstoppable. And yet the most powerful transformation isn't just financial, it's psychological. The moment you realize you've built something that can sustain itself, your entire relationship with money changes. You stop chasing it, you start managing it. You understand that the goal isn't to get rich fast, it's to stay rich forever. That's why the people who make it past that first million often live completely different financial lives. They don't panic when markets dip. They don't obsess over short-term returns. They play a different game, one of patience, structure, and faith in the process. They've seen how the system works. They've felt the years of slow progress, and now they're rewarded with the exponential climb. When they say money makes money, they're not bragging. They're describing a mechanical truth of time and consistency. Wealth at this level becomes less about effort and more about protection. It's about maintaining balance, not letting your success push you into overconfidence or reckless decisions. One family described it beautifully. The first million felt impossible. The second million came faster. But the hardest part was learning not to interfere once it started working. Because once compounding hits its stride, your best move is often to stay out of the way. This is also when you realize something profound. Wealth doesn't grow in a straight line. It bends upward, slowly at first, then suddenly. The curve of compounding gets steeper the longer you stay on it. That's why giving up early is so costly. Every year you exit the game, you're not just losing time, you're losing acceleration. Imagine this curve as a hill. Climbing the base feels endless. That's your first million. But once you reach the crest, gravity flips. Suddenly, you're being pulled forward by momentum instead of fighting against it. That's what the second million represents, the shift from pushing the boulder uphill to watching it roll forward under its own weight. And here's the inspiring truth. Anyone can reach that point. You don't need a huge salary or a secret formula or perfect timing. You just need consistency and time. Even if your income is below average, even if you start late, the principle remains unchanged. The closer you get, the faster it goes. So if you're somewhere on that climb, saving, investing, and wondering if it's even worth it, remember this: the system works. It's slow at first because it's building a foundation that will carry you for decades. You're not just accumulating money, you're building a mechanism of freedom. The second million is closer than you think. Every dollar you save today, every small investment you make is quietly pushing you toward that acceleration point where the returns begin to multiply and your wealth starts to grow almost effortlessly. Stay the course. Trust the process, because once you've crossed that invisible line, the journey shifts from grinding to gliding. This is Mike Compound, reminding you that the hardest part of building wealth isn't earning the next million. It's believing that your first one will actually come. But once it does, everything changes. Your time, your confidence, your freedom, all of it begins to compound faster than you ever thought possible.